The battlefield lay in silence, the kind that only followed after the final shots had been fired, after the war machines had screamed their last, after the bodies had stopped twitching. The twin moons of Vir 7 hung low in the sky, their pale light stretching over the ruins of what had once been a Zalari war front. Smoke curled from the wreckage, thick with the acrid scent of burnt alloy, melted circuitry, and scorched flesh. The ground was littered with the remains of the fallen, some in twisted armor, others barely recognizable as anything once living. And among them, Elezithara lay motionless. She had fought until the last charge of energy burned through her veins, until her muscles had locked, and the nerves in her spine had finally given in. Paralyzed. Not dead, but close enough that her people had made no distinction. She had watched them leave, one by one, the warships lifting into the sky without so much as a backward glance. Zalari warriors did not burden themselves with the weak. There were no rescue missions, no medics dispatched to fallen soldiers. If you couldn't stand, if you couldn't fight, you were dead weight. And dead weight had no place in the Dominion. Elezithara had always known this. She had lived by the code. But knowing it and experiencing it were two different things. She had been one of the greatest, one of the fiercest warriors in the fleet, a strategist, a hunter of human soldiers. And now she was just a husk lying in the dirt, staring at the stars, waiting for the end. That was until she heard the voice. Ah, hell. Elezithara blinked. The words were in human standard, the guttural drawl unmistakably Terran. Footsteps crunched over the wreckage, slow and cautious. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing to loot her corpse, always a good sign. Or maybe a bad one, depending on the human. She shifted her eyes as much as she could, scanning the darkness, searching for the source of the voice. A shadow moved through the smoke, outlined against the flickering remains of burning metal. Human. Tall. Heavy boots, reinforced exo-armor, military, but not pristine. The edges of his armor were worn, patched together like he'd survived one too many close calls. His helmet was tucked under his arm, revealing a face lined with exhaustion, the kind that settled deep into the bones. Nathan Carter was having a very bad day. He sighed, running a gloved hand through his short, dark hair, then muttered to himself, Of course I find the one still breathing Zalari in this whole goddamn graveyard." Elezithara glared at him, or at least she tried to. The whole paralyzed thing was really putting a dent in her intimidation factor. Nathan exhaled sharply, tilting his head as he studied her. "You know, I could just leave you here. Would be the smart thing to do. I could turn around, pretend I didn't see anything, and get back to my ship. Sleep like a baby." He paused. "Well, more like an insomniac with a drinking problem, but you get the point." She said nothing. Not that she could. Her throat was dry, her body unresponsive. "Right," he muttered, rubbing his temple. "Talking to myself again? That's a great sign, Nathan. Real healthy behavior." He crouched beside her, and for a moment she thought he was going to finish what the Zalari had started. A plasma shot to the head, quick, efficient, merciful even. Instead, he reached for a small scanner on his wrist and ran it over her body. The device beeped as it processed the data, the results flickering over his visor. "Oh, well, that's just great," he grumbled. "Paralysis. Nerve damage. Yeah, you're in real good shape." Elezithara tried to summon some dignity, but dignity was difficult when you were sprawled on the ground like discarded cargo. Nathan groaned and rubbed his face. "God damn it. I knew I was going to regret this." Then, with another sigh that sounded like it carried the weight of 1,000 poor life choices, he stood and turned away. And for the first time since the battle ended, Elizithara felt something close to fear. She hadn't been afraid when she fought. She hadn't been afraid when she fell. She hadn't even been afraid when her people left her to die. But now, as the human walked away, as the sound of his footsteps grew fainter, something inside her twisted. She had survived battles, explosions, close-quarters combat. She had survived humans, but she would not survive this world alone. Not like this. She forced her throat to work, forced her dry tongue against her teeth, forced the air through her lungs. Wait! Nathan stopped mid-step. Elizithara's breath hitched. That single word had cost her more than she cared to admit. But it had worked. He was turning, looking down at her with a face that was far too amused for someone who had just found an enemy warrior in need of help. His lips twitched. "Oh, great. You can talk." She tried again, voice rasping. "You will regret this." Nathan barked out a short laugh. "Yeah? Sweetheart, I regret everything. What's one more bad decision?" And with that, he crouched down again and started hauling her onto a makeshift stretcher of metal plating and scavenged fabric, muttering to himself the entire time. "If I die because of this, I'm gonna haunt my own damn grave." Nathan Carter wasn't built for good deeds. In fact, he was pretty sure they went against everything his survival instincts had taught him. And yet, here he was, dragging a paralyzed Zellery warrior across the battlefield like some idiot protagonist in a bad war movie. "Yeah, this is definitely how I die," he muttered as he tightened the straps on the makeshift stretcher. The stretch of wreckage around them was eerily silent, the usual sounds of war, distant explosions, gunfire, the mechanical whine of patrol drones, replaced by an unnatural stillness. The Zellery had pulled out completely, leaving nothing but their dead and whatever wreckage wasn't worth salvaging. Typical. They never wasted resources, not even on their own people. "You hearing me, warrior princess?" Nathan huffed, adjusting his grip on the stretcher's handles. "I want it on record that this is a terrible idea." Elizithara, the warrior in question, had her head tilted slightly, violet eyes half-lidded in exhaustion. She'd barely spoken since he'd hoisted her onto the damn thing, which was probably for the best, considering her first words to him had been a death threat. He should leave her. He knew that. A human soldier and a crippled Zellery? That was just a slow-motion disaster waiting to happen. But then he'd seen her eyes, sharp and bright, filled with something that wasn't quite defiance, but wasn't surrender either. Nathan groaned. He hated complicated situations. "You're either gonna get me killed or make me look like the biggest sucker in the galaxy," he grumbled as he started moving again. Elizithara managed a dry whisper. "Both. Seem likely." Nathan barked out a laugh despite himself. "Oh, great. She's got jokes now. That's fantastic." She didn't respond, and when he glanced at her again, her expression had gone slack. Not unconscious, but dangerously close. Hey, he said, nudging her shoulder, not that she'd feel it. "Don't you pass out on me. I just committed like half a war crime rescuing you, and I am not carrying your dead weight back to my ship." Her eyelids fluttered. "You talk too much." "Yeah. Well, you're welcome." The ship wasn't far now. The Blue Vulture was no pristine military vessel. It was more like an aging scrapyard reject with just enough functional parts to keep flying. The hull was patched together with mismatched plating, and the engines made a sound like an asthmatic reactor every time they fired up. But it was home. Nathan hauled the stretcher up the ramp, muttering curses the whole way, and kicked the panel to close the ship behind him. The moment the door sealed, he let out a breath and leaned against the wall, staring down at his unexpected passenger. "All right, warrior princess. Welcome to my very ugly, very poorly maintained spaceship." Ylazithara barely turned her head. "This is a mistake." "Yeah, well," Nathan sighed, hauling her into the medbay. "I have a long history of those." The ship's medbay was small because Nathan had never really needed a medbay. Sure, he got shot at a lot, but he was more of a slap a bandage on it and keep moving kind of guy. The Zilari, though, she needed something a little more advanced. Nathan plugged in the neural stimulator and glanced down at her. "All right, let's see what we're dealing with." A holographic display flickered to life, showing a full-body scan of Ylazithara's nervous system. The paralysis wasn't total, but it was damn close. Spinal nerve trauma, disrupted bioelectric pathways, and what looked like some kind of Zilari nanite system that had completely shut down. He frowned. "Huh? So, your fancy alien body basically just turned the lights off?" Ylazithara exhaled slowly. "The Zilari prioritize efficiency." That's a real polite way of saying they abandon people who can't walk. Her expression barely shifted, but he saw something flicker behind her eyes. "You want to tell me why your own people left you to rot?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "They do not waste resources on the broken." Nathan scoffed. "Wow, real warm and fuzzy culture you got there." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Your people would do the same." "Hey," Nathan wobbled his hand. "Depends on which humans. Some would leave you. Some would shoot you. Some would start a GoFundMe." She blinked at him. "A what?" Nathan grinned. "Don't worry about it." The scanner beeped, and he turned his attention back to the readout. He wasn't a doctor, but he'd patched himself up enough times to know that she wasn't beyond saving. The paralysis wasn't permanent, but it was going to take time. Not that she seemed thrilled by the idea. Ylazithara stared at the ceiling, her jaw tight. "I will not be a prisoner." "Lady, do I look like I have the resources to imprison anyone?" Nathan gestured at the ship around them. "I don't even have enough rations for myself. You think I planned for a guest?" Her fingers twitched slightly. Not much, but enough for him to notice. She noticed, too. Her breath caught. A spark of something flashed in her gaze. Hope? No, not hope. Determination. Nathan leaned against the counter. "Guess that means you're not totally screwed, huh?" She exhaled slowly. "Not yet." Nathan nodded. "Cool. That means I didn't just risk my ass for nothing." Ylazithara studied him for a long moment. "You did not have to help me." "Yeah, well," he sighed. "I make bad decisions. It's kind of my whole deal." There was silence between them for a while. The hum of the ship, the occasional beep of the medical scanner, the distant thrum of the engines. Then, finally, Ylazithara spoke. "I will not be weak." Nathan smirked. "I'd be real surprised if you were." She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the battle, she allowed herself to rest. Nathan watched her for a moment longer, then exhaled. "Yeah," he muttered to himself, rubbing his face. "I'm gonna regret this." The blue vulture rattled as it drifted through space, its patched-up engines humming with the kind of optimism usually reserved for machines that didn't know any better. The ship had seen better days. Hell, it had seen better decades. But it was still flying, which was more than Nathan could say for most things he'd been responsible for. The same could be said for his passenger. Ylazithara was alive. Barely. Her body remained stubbornly uncooperative, the neural stimulator keeping her systems from completely shutting down. It was progress, if you considered not dying a form of progress. Nathan stood in the doorway of the medbay, arms crossed, watching her with the kind of tired curiosity one might have for a very angry, very injured cat. "You planning on waking up any time soon?" he muttered. "'Cause I gotta tell you, talking to myself's only fun when there's alcohol involved." Isla Zathara stirred, eyelids fluttering open with a sluggishness that suggested her body still wasn't on speaking terms with the rest of her. Her violet eyes locked onto him, their usual sharpness dulled by exhaustion. "How long?" Her voice was rough, but there was no weakness in it, just a simple demand for information. 3 days, Nathan replied, leaning against the wall. "You've been real fun company. Hardly any backtalk, barely any death threats. Honestly, I'm kinda disappointed." Isla Zathara exhaled, her fingers twitching against the cot. She felt heavier than before, as if the weight of her useless limbs had only increased with time. Paralysis was a cage, and she was trapped in it. Nathan seemed to sense her frustration. "Hey, don't get all dramatic. You're doing better than you were when I found you. You talked, you moved a finger. At this rate, you'll be walking in, what, a few years?" She shot him a glare so sharp he could have used it to cut wires. He grinned. "Ah, there it is. That's the terrifying murder stare I was waiting for." She ignored him, shifting her focus to the ceiling. "Where are we?" "Middle of nowhere," Nathan said, waving a hand vaguely. "Figured that was safer than anywhere specific. The Zellery and the Terran military both got real trigger-happy after that last battle. Didn't seem smart to stick around." Isla Zathara's expression remained unreadable. She had no home to return to. Not anymore. If her people considered her broken, she was as good as dead to them. And the humans? They were no more likely to welcome a former Zelari war leader than they were to start offering free hugs to every alien they met. "So, what's the plan, warrior princess?" Nathan asked, folding his arms. "Because right now, you're taking up valuable medical cot space, and my ship doesn't exactly come with 5-star rehab facilities." Isla Zathara was quiet for a long moment. Then, carefully, she forced her fingers to move, just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. "I will recover," she said, voice steady. "And then, I will decide." Nathan nodded. "See, I like that. Nice and vague, real mysterious, keeps things interesting." She narrowed her eyes. "Are you always like this?" He grinned. "Oh, absolutely." She sighed, closing her eyes again. "Unfortunate." Nathan chuckled, pushing off the wall. "All right, I'll leave you to your existential crisis. Try not to stress too much. It's bad for your nerves, which, you know, are already real unhappy with you." He turned to leave, but before he could step out of the room, her voice stopped him. "Nathan." He glanced back, surprised she'd used his name. Up until now, it had just been human, or whatever insult she was holding in at the moment. Isla Zathara's eyes were open again, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Why did you save me?" For once, Nathan didn't have a smart-ass answer ready. He shrugged. "Hell if I know." That wasn't entirely true, but it was easier than trying to explain the way he'd felt when he first saw her. Broken, but still alive, still fighting even as her body betrayed her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was just something. And something was better than nothing. Nathan forced a grin. "Guess I just have a thing for lost causes." Isla Zathara studied him for a moment longer, then closed her eyes. "Foolish." He laughed. "Yeah, that too." And with that, he left her to rest, already wondering how much more trouble he'd just signed himself up for. The Zellery warship loomed ahead, a dark beast against the stars, its angular hull reflecting the cold light of space. Even from a distance, Nathan could tell it was built for efficiency. Sharp lines, no wasted space, no excess ornamentation. It looked like it had been engineered by someone who thought emotions were a waste of processing power, which, frankly, made a lot of sense considering the kind of people Isla Zathara had come from. Nathan drummed his fingers against the console of the Blue Vulture, staring at the docking bay doors slowly opening in front of him. This was it. He was handing her back, dropping her off like a lost package. He should be relieved. But he wasn't. Behind him, Isla Zathara sat strapped into a seat, her movements slow but functional. 3 weeks of neural stimulation, improvisational physical therapy, and stubborn willpower had brought her from full paralysis to something almost resembling mobility. Her fingers flexed against the armrest, still weaker than she liked, but not useless. And that alone had changed everything. She was no longer the warrior left for dead on a battlefield. She wasn't the same woman Nathan had found. Nor was she the same Zalari who had once viewed humans as nothing more than targets. But what was she now? That was the million-credit question. Nathan flicked a switch, opening a comms channel. "All right, Zalari Command, I got your missing warrior. She's still kicking. Well, metaphorically speaking, 'cause her legs still kinda suck." A voice crackled through the speakers, clipped and emotionless. "Confirmed. Prepare for transfer. Your cooperation is acknowledged." Nathan made a face. "Wow, you guys really know how to make a guy feel special." Isla Zathara said nothing, her gaze locked on the warship. There was something tight in her expression, something unreadable. He frowned. "You good?" She didn't look at him. "They will assess me." "Yeah?" Nathan leaned back. "And then what?" Her fingers tightened on the armrest. "If I am still considered useful, they will reinstate me." "And if not?" A beat of silence. Then, quietly, "They will finish what they started." Nathan stared at her. "You do realize that's completely insane, right?" Isla Zathara exhaled slowly. "It is the way of my people." "Yeah, well, your people suck." She smirked slightly. "That is a fair statement." The docking clamps engaged with a mechanical clang, locking the Blue Vulture into place. Nathan glanced at the airlock controls, then back at her. "Well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I'll just be on my way then. Try not to die, yeah?" Isla Zathara rose unsteadily to her feet, her body still adjusting to its newfound strength. The soldiers didn't move to assist her. They simply watched. Nathan hated them immediately. She took one step toward the airlock, then another. Then she stopped. Slowly, deliberately, she turned to face him, her violet eyes sharp, calculating. And then, to his absolute shock, she turned back to the soldiers and said, "I will not return." The airlock, which had been so damn quiet a second ago, suddenly felt way too loud. Nathan blinked. "Wait, what?" The lead soldier, an officer judging by the insignia, tilted his head slightly. "That is not your decision to make." Isla Zathara's stance shifted, shoulders squaring. "It is." The officer's gaze flicked between her and Nathan. "This human has clouded your mind." Nathan raised a hand. Hello? I'm standing right here." Isla Zathara ignored him. "I am not weak," she said, voice steady. "I am not useless, but I will not serve those who abandoned me." The officer's expression remained unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Then you are an enemy of the Dominion." Nathan sighed, rubbing his temples. "You guys just love making things unnecessarily dramatic, huh?" The officer ignored him, signaling to his men. "Kill them." "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" Nathan barely had time to reach for his sidearm before Isla Zathara moved. She wasn't at full strength. Not even close, but she didn't need to be. With the kind of precision only a trained warrior had, she grabbed the nearest soldier's weapon and used it against him. The plasma blast seared through his armor before he had time to react. Nathan, catching up quickly, shot the second soldier in the leg, sending him crumpling to the ground with a shout. The officer barely flinched. "You would throw away your people for this human?" Ilezithara's expression was cold. "They threw me away first." Nathan grabbed her arm. "Time to go, warrior princess." They sprinted. Well, Nathan sprinted, while Ilezithara did an aggressive fast walk back toward the ship. The moment they crossed the threshold, Nathan slammed the emergency launch controls, disengaging the docking clamps. The Blue Vulture tore free from the warship, engines screaming, alarms blaring. Plasma shots streaked past them as they dove into open space. But Nathan knew one thing for certain. They weren't going back. Ilezithara, still catching her breath, slumped into the co-pilot's seat. Nathan glanced at her. "So, what now?" She looked at him. Then, in a rare moment of complete sincerity, she said, "We survive." Nathan smirked. "Yeah, I can work with that." And together, they disappeared into the stars.